let's talk about related conditionals. So, as we've gone over before, as we've reviewed previously, conditional statement is anything where it's if P, then Q. We know this. This is the formula of a conditional statement. If P, then Q. And like an example of this can be like if measure of angle A is 20, then angle A is an acute angle. This is a correct statement, and it is in the formula of if P, if hypothesis, then conclusion. Correct? And I actually I'm going to want to label these. So this is my P, and then this is my Q, and this is going to be important later. Now let's go over some other concepts, okay? So that I just told you was a conditional statement. Conditional statements is always, always, always if P, then Q. But if you have a converse statement is formed by exchanging, meaning you're just flipping the hypothesis and the conclusion in the conditional. You're just switching the hypothesis and conclusion. Meaning that if you had, in the conditional statement was P then Q, your converse is Q then P. And an example of this is that if angle A is an acute angle, then measure of angle A is 20. And if I can look here, angle A is an acute angle. This was always our Q, right? It matches. And then measure of angle A is 20. That is our P. It's just switched. The two things are switched. Now, to get a little more in depth, we have inverse. So inverse is another concept that you have the same order of if P then Q. Just like in your conditional statement, you had if hypothesis then conclusion. But with an inverse is that you are negating both your hypothesis and your conclusion. Okay, and an inverse is formed by negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion in the conditional. Meaning that, and the sign for this is this like little squiggly, that inverse is the negation of P, then the negation of Q. Okay, or the negation of the hypothesis, then the negation of the conclusion. And let's see an example. And I'm using the same thing as I've done earlier. I'm just using this. That look. Here is that if measure of angle A is not 20, this is my negation of P. It is still P, right? It is still measure of angle A is 20, but is the negation because I use the word not. Then angle A is not an acute angle. Again, this is the negation of Q because it's still the same sentence as Q as I've had earlier always. But it is the negation because I use the word not. Okay, and then the last concept is the concept of contrapositive. So contrapositive is basically you are not only flipping the order of your hypothesis and your conclusion, like here you can see that the negation of the conclusion becomes before the negation of the hypothesis, meaning that you're flipping the order and you are negating both of them. So you're basically, you're like how in the converse you flip them and in the inverse you negated them. You're combining those two and making the contrapositive, which is the negation of negating both the hypothesis and the conclusion of the converse of the conditional. Because if you look here, the converse is just the normal, right? Just the inverse, right? The converse is the inverse of the conditional statement. The contrapositive is the negation of the converse, okay? So, which means that if I use the same example as I've had earlier, if measure of angle A is not an acute angle, measure of angle A is not an acute angle, this was our conclusion, right? As from before, this was our conclusion, but is the negation of the conclusion, meaning that this is negation of Q. Then measure of angle A is not 20. This is the negation of P. And if you read this sentence, okay, read the original sentence right here. If measure of angle A is 20, then angle A is an acute angle. Now, if you read this again, I'm sorry I wrote over it. If you read this, that if measure of angle A is not an acute angle, then measure of angle A is not 20, okay? And if you think about this, this is logically the same thing as your conditional, because you're saying here that if you have an angle and it's not acute, meaning that your angle is either right or obtuse, then your angle will not be 20 degrees, right? Because you know that if the angle is 20, then the angle is acute, meaning that always, 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 this is like a conjecture, a conditional statement and its contrapositive will always be logically equivalent, meaning that logically, if you think about it, they're the same thing. And the same thing goes for converse and an inverse. A converse and an inverse are both logically equivalent because if you read here converse, if angle A is an acute angle, then measure of angle A is 20. Okay? If angle A, you're talking about angle A is an acute angle, then measure of angle A is 20. And then if you read the inverse, if measure of angle A is not 20, meaning that if measure of angle A is like 80, then angle A is not an acute angle. This is also correct, right? And these are both logically the same thing if you think about it. Now let's do some practice with these related conditionals. Okay, this question says, write the converse, inverse, and contrapositive of the following statement. Determine the truth value of each statement, and then if false, provide a counterexample. Okay, and our statement is the following. Dolphins are mammals that live in the water. Now I want to actually rewrite this statement in its conditional statement so that I can just like figure out all the converse and everything like that. So the original statement, which is always true by the way, original statement, which is always true, is going to be, and if you think about it, dolphins are mammals that live in the water. So my statement is going to be that if an animal, right, any animal is a dolphin, then it is a mammal, right, mammal that lives in water. While this wasn't asked by the question, this is important for to write all the other phrases, okay? So now that I have my original statement, here I like to do is that I like to go and underline my P and underline my Q. It's really important for me, especially when I'm wording the other things, okay? So here, an animal is a dolphin. That is my P, okay? And I like to put P in pink. And then it is a mammal that lives in the water. This is my Q. Okay, now from this, I can go and write my converse, inverse, and contrapositive, right? So my converse, I'm going to go up here. Converse, I know is Q, then P. So I'm just switching it. Meaning that if I have Q right here, I'm going to rewrite my converse saying that. Okay, my converse, I'm going to write it as if an animal, right? Because I'm basically just taking this part. If an animal is a mammal that lives in the sea, that lives in the sea, then it is a dolphin. This is my converse because look, all I did was I took my Q, which was this, and then I took my P, which was this, and I just flipped them. I flipped the order of them that they came in the sentence, right? Now I need to determine the truth value of this statement. Let's think about it. If I have a random animal, and it's a mammal that lives in the sea, it is a dolphin. Is this always true? No, because your mammal could be like a whale. Your mammal could be a shark. Your mammal could be anything. Meaning that we just find a counterexample for this, right? So I'm going to write here actually, truth value. It is false, correct? Because we figured out, and now it said give a counterexample. A shark or a whale, right, are both mammals that live in the sea, but are not dolphins. Right? So I've just successfully done my truth value and my counterexample. Now let's do the same process for the inverse and contrapositive. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my review page, and I wrote here that the inverse is the negation of P, then the negation of Q. Okay, so then here was P, right? So if the negation of P, I'm going to rewrite it as if an animal is not a dolphin, then it is not a mammal that lives in the sea. So now I've successfully written my inverse statement. Now we need to determine the truth value of this. Is this true? Okay, let's think about it. So I have an animal, and it's not a dolphin. Then it is not a mammal that lives in the sea. No, that's false. Another, like a shark, that's not a dolphin. Like a shark is not a dolphin, right? That satisfies this. But it is a mammal that lives in the water. So that means that I've just successfully found a counter argument, meaning that this truth value is false. And then I'm going to write my counter that a shark is not a dolphin, but it is a mammal that lives in the water, blah, 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 okay? So that way, we've successfully done the truth value, and we've successfully written our counter. Now for the last one, our contrapositive. So for a contrapositive, I'm going to go back to my review page, and I can see here that the contrapositive is the negation of Q, then the negation of P. Okay, so then the Q is right here, a mammal that lives in the water. So I'm going to write here that if an animal is not a mammal that lives in the sea, then it is not a dolphin. Because here you can see this is my Q, right? A mammal that lives in the sea. That's my Q that I've successfully written up here, right? But I just did the negation of it. I wrote not. And then here, I wrote then it is not a dolphin. That is the negation of my statement of P. So I've successfully written my contrapositive statement. Now, let's think, what is the truth value of this? Well, as I've told you before, a contrapositive will always be logically equivalent to my conditional statement, meaning that my original statement up here was true, right? If an animal is a dolphin, then it is a mammal that lives in the water. So by that logic, because I know that a contrapositive is logically equivalent to my original statement, I can already say that a contrapositive is true. There's no counter argument, no nothing. And yeah, that is basically it. Thank you guys so much for watching. And I'll catch you in the next one. DM me if you have any problems.